Chapter 13:10 Envoy. The prayer hall in the Evernight Cathedral was as dark as before. Only the holes on the walls allowed some light to seep in, like stars in the night. Klein sat in a corner that wasn't eye-catching. He took off his tall hat and began praying like a pious member of the congregation. He simply mentioned how Roselle had revived in his last mausoleum, and focused on the corruption of the primordial moon. He deliberately emphasized that, in order to prevent the crimson moon within him from being born in the real world, Roselle had chosen to terminate the process of having his Black Emperor uniqueness and 3 sequence 1 characteristics return to him. At the end of the prayer, Klein pointed out the hidden dangers of the cards of blasphemy, and he expressed his concerns about the whereabouts of the Mother card and the Moon card. In fact, Roselle only mentioned the need to be careful of the Mother card and didn't mention the Moon. However, Klein knew that the 2 pathways of Earth and Moon belonged to the Mother Goddess of Depravity. Therefore, to be cautious, he specially added the Moon card. This was also the main reason he was worried about Earth Mother Lilith. Compared to most of the 22 pathways, the high-sequence Beyonders of the Plantar and Moon pathway had a huge advantage. That was that they didn't need to worry about the primordial one from awakening in their bodies. They didn't need to worry about dissociation from approaching the world underground. This was because the Beyonder characteristics they possessed didn't directly come from the primordial one, which led to no corresponding mental imprint. However, if they were to directly go underground and enter the Chaos Sea, no matter who it was, they would encounter corruption. It was just that the extent would be different. This advantage was very likely due to the fact that the sanguine ancestor Lilith was more special than the other ancient gods. After all, she didn't need to divert a large part of her energy to resist the will of the primordial one awakening within her. And back then, the invisible barrier protecting this world was still sufficiently sturdy, separating the Mother Goddess of Depravity and the other Great Old Ones from Earth, making it difficult for them to exert too much of an influence on the situation inside. But with the passage of time, this advantage gradually became a problem. As the underground corruption became weaker and weaker, the invisible barrier also became weaker and cracks began appearing. Under such circumstances, Earth Mother Lilith's situation became worse. This was because she was facing the intrusion of the Mother Goddess of Depravity that was ever increasing in potency and terror. In this aspect, the original creator, the oldest one, who was dead, was definitely inferior to the living Mother Goddess of Depravity. Considering how outer deities who had transcended sequences had an influence on Beyonders from their own pathway, Klein felt that he couldn't afford negligence on such matters. After he finished his prayer, he waited for nearly 5 minutes. After confirming that there was no response, he stood up, put on his wandering magician's tall hat, and walked out of the cathedral that belonged to the Evernight. To him, this was mainly a disclosure obligation. As for what the Evernight goddess planned to do with it, or if she would remind him of certain matters, it was beyond his control. In short, Klein could only temporarily believe that the Evernight goddess knew the relative importance of matters. Backlund, at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. The top-hatted Emlyn White got off his carriage and looked at the sun covered by the clouds and mist. On the way to the entrance of the cathedral, he gently rotated the ring on his left hand, as if to flaunt his identity. The ring was semi-translucent in color, as though it was made from light red amber. There was a blood-red gem embedded on its tip, a reward Emlyn had received a long time ago, Lilith's ring. After becoming a demigod, Emlyn could suppress the effect of bloodthirst from the ring to a certain extent. Every day, he only needed to drink 3 bottles of human blood to be immune to the corresponding negative effects. Therefore, in order to showcase his special identity as the ancestors blessed, he began wearing this ring permanently. After entering the Harvest Church, Emlyn automatically removed his top hat. At this moment, Cosme, Ernst, and the other sanguine in Backlund, who were waiting for Bishop Utravsky, stood up one after another. Looking down at the aisle, they greeted softly, "Good morning, my lord." Emlyn looked ahead and nodded indiscernibly. "Is Mistral still not here yet?" "Count Mistral set up a chapel at home," Ernst simply explained. Emlyn didn't comment on this. He walked forward and casually said, "He will still have to come when Mass is held." He looked around before saying, "Where's Bishop Utravsky?" "The bishop is waiting for you behind. The church's envoy has arrived." Ernst controlled his facial expression as he answered Emlyn's question politely. "The church's envoy." Emlyn rotated the light red ring on his left hand and walked to the back of the cathedral. Soon, he saw Father Utravsky and the slightly curly black-haired envoy of the church with a tall nose and deep eyes. "This is the Archbishop, His Grace Loretto," Father Yutravsky introduced the envoy to Emlyn. He stood by the window, blocking most of the light. "Good morning, Your Grace," Emlyn replied with the etiquette of the Church of Earth. Loretto smiled and spoke in rather awkward loanese. "There's no need to address me as Your Grace. Although you aren't an archbishop, you have the status of an archbishop. From today onwards, you will be a hierophant, a high-ranking deacon of the church. You will be in charge of the sanguine matters in Backlund." Without giving Emlyn any time to digest this information, Loretto continued, "I came to Backlund under the Holy See's orders. I'll tell you everything that needs to be taken note of within the church." "Please speak." Emlyn suppressed his glee and said politely. Loretto's expression immediately turned serious. "First of all, the most important point is that, be it the clergymen of the church or the believers of the Earth Mother, as long as you claim that you have obtained a revelation, they are individuals who have been enticed by demons, with no exceptions. If anyone reports something like this to you, or if you have obtained a revelation personally, please inform Bishop Yutravsky as soon as possible and report it to the church." Father Yutravsky didn't mention this before. This request sounds very strange, as though there's some suspicion. Emlyn frowned as he looked at Father Yutravsky, who was standing by the window. The bishop never said anything about taking note of such matters. Before he finished his sentence, Emlyn suddenly realized that he came off as criticizing Bishop Yutravsky, but he couldn't find any better explanation in his haste. Almost at the same time, he understood what was odd about what Archbishop Loretto had said. This was telling everyone that the Earth Mother you sensed isn't the real Earth Mother. This is saying that a large number of the revelations us sanguine received from the ancestor are fake. It's from demons or evil gods. The look in Emlyn's eyes sank as he tried to maintain his composure. At this moment, Loretto didn't mind and smiled. "Bishop Yutravsky didn't tell you because he didn't know either." Father didn't know. In that instant, Emlyn actually felt a little sympathetic towards Bishop Yutravsky. He felt that as a Phasacian, a hierophant who had changed faith in his later years, he had been ostracized by the other members of the Church of Earth. Sensing the change in his gaze, Loretto added, "That's because he's a blessed. He doesn't need to care about the temptation of demons and evil gods." Bishop Yutravsky nodded and said calmly, "The revelations of Earth Mother are in her Holy Bible, in those lines of teaching. Anything other than that is heresy." Emlyn was somewhat puzzled, but he couldn't think of any question. He grunted and said to Loretto, "Then what is the second point that needs paying attention?" Loretto made his expression turn serious. "If you receive a revelation, don't blindly believe it. Please immediately seek confirmation from Bishop Yutravsky." "Why?" Emlyn was puzzled. This was basically telling him that the only response he would receive was either from evil gods or demons. Loretto deliberated over his words and explained in detail. "In this world, there are many evil existences. They will pretend to be deities, and bewitch the clergyman in an act of enticing believers. That's because the two main pathways of the Church of Earth Mother are related to life. Therefore, the effects they receive are more severe than the other churches. From time to time, there are people who will take the wrong path and attempt forbidden life experiments, thus slowly degenerating. In order to prevent such a development, we reorganized the church a long time ago under the guidance of the Mother's will to establish the system of a favored and blessed." Favored and blessed. Emlyn's understanding of the Church of Earth was limited to the Holy Bible and part of the Scriptures. He was momentarily at a loss. He had never taken the initiative to ask Father Yutravsky about the Church of Earth Mother. Loretto glanced at Emlyn and nodded slightly. The favored are clergymen who have won the Mother's favor and are from the two pathways of Earth and Moon. The blessed refers to people who have obtained the Mother's blessing and are from other pathways. The latter is less affected by the demons and evil gods. It can help us verify the authenticity of the revelations. Under such circumstances, even if it's a decree issued by the Holy See, there has to be at least a second-in-command favored. Otherwise, it can be regarded as null and void. As he spoke, Loretto took out a document and unfolded it in front of Emlyn. Apart from what the Archbishop had just said, it included the details of him accepting the mission and appointment as an envoy. At the end of the document, there were a few names. The first was from the Holy See of the Church of Earth, Matriarch Roland, and the rest were all names that Emlyn didn't know. He barely recognized the last one to be Father Yutravsky. Father Yutravsky's handwriting is really ugly. As Emlyn mumbled to himself, he began to have a strong sense of doubt regarding the blessed and favored system. Why were the blessed less enticed by evil gods or demons? Why were they able to verify a revelation, but the favored couldn't? As his thoughts raced, Emlyn suddenly noticed a detail. The blessed aren't from the two pathways of earth and moon. Therefore, the problem didn't lie in the favored, but the two pathways themselves? Emlyn vaguely felt that his guess was the truth. Chapter 1311 New Mission. Emlyn vaguely sensed that there might be some abnormalities in the two beyonder pathways of earth and moon, but he didn't ask Archbishop Loreto about it directly. He doesn't seem like he would answer. It's better to wait for the next tarot gathering to ask the world, the hanged man, and the others. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly, indicating that he already knew the difference between a favored and a blessed as he muttered to himself. He didn't consider seeking Mr. Fool's answer, because he felt that there was no need since the corresponding problem wasn't too important. After all, the Sanguines dukes, marquises, and counts were still alive and well, and there hadn't been any particularly negative news regarding the Church of Earth Mother. At the same time, his previous guess also made Emlyn connect these to the influence the primordial moon, an existence which was perhaps an evil god or a high-level devil in disguise, had on the moon pathway. He had once caused many sanguine who had prayed to him to lose control, turning into monsters that only knew how to mate and reproduce. Emlyn suspected that this was one of the evil existences that sent the fake visions and revelations. With no more questions from him, Loreto put away the document in his hand and thought for a moment before saying, "This is the problem that requires special attention. In addition, I hope that you can set up 3 to 5 Beyonder teams in Backlund. They should mainly be members of the Sanguine." Emlyn was always law-abiding. The only crime he did was steal blood at the hospital. He subconsciously raised his question, "Does the Church of Evernight and the Church of Storms have any objections?" Loreto said with a benevolent smile. This was a request from them. As most of the forces of the Church of Steam have withdrawn, there is a lack of official Beyonders in Lone. Although the Church of Evernight and the Church of Storms have also recruited a group of machinery hive mind members who don't wish to leave Lone, and the lower-ranking clergymen, they are ultimately just a minority. Furthermore, they still need to handle the purge in Faysac and the independent colonies overseas. Therefore, they hope that they can provide some help. This is quite beneficial for our proselytizing in Lone. However, you have to remember that, here we have to restrain ourselves. We can't freely proselytize. Just be on the same level as the remnant Church of Steam. Of course, our believers won't be able to catch up to the Church of Steam for a long period of time. This requires a generation, 2 generations, or even 3 generations of effort. Yes, maintaining the present scale and having a certain degree of development is enough. It's too troublesome to proselytize. Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief and calmly replied, "Okay." In the Sonia Sea, City of Generosity, Byam. Alger wore a bishop's robe embroidered with symbols of lightning and waves. He wore a metal storm sacred emblem and stood at the peak of the coastal mountain range, looking out at the other side of the forest. There were very few trees there. The surrounding hills and short mountains had been flattened, revealing a hidden harbor. It was a private harbor that belonged to the resistance. It was definitely not comparable to Byam's port, but it was of medium size, enough to sustain many people's lives. A city with an unconstrained and crude style had been built near the harbor. The city wasn't huge, probably only 1/5 the size of Byam or smaller. In the center were 2 towers. One was a spire, the other steeple. They were all strangely silver, reflecting blinding light under the sun. Surrounding the twin towers were many paved roads made of cement. They led to buildings that were mainly made of stone or were connected to open squares and training grounds. The green trees lining the sides of the street exuded a feeling of grandeur. Alger knew that the city didn't only consist of residents from the City of Silver, but also people from Moon City. Many of the latter were extremely deformed. They were temporarily unwilling to interact with Byam, as well as the residents of the other cities on the island. They only purchased their necessities through the people of the City of Silver. It was said that they planned on building a city that belonged to them deep in the forest, and would only leave a path to the new City of Silver. These are all believers of Mr. Fool. I'll have to slowly integrate them into the entirety of the Rorstad archipelago. For now, I'll temporarily not disturb the deformed and allow the residents of the City of Silver to bring normal-looking Moon City residents to Byam. Alger seriously considered his subsequent actions. After settling down the residents of the City of Silver and Moon City, he had actually completed the mission that Mr. Fool had given him. However, he believed that he was still far from being able to exchange for sea god's identity, authority, and status. Therefore, he did his best to deal with the problems left behind by the Great Migration. To be frank, Alger was most worried that Mr. Fool didn't give him anything to do. If that happened, he didn't know how long it would take for him to make enough contributions. Accompanying the new City of Silver's establishment and the immense vibrancy it exuded, he acutely sensed danger. There was more than one sequence 4 demigod in the City of Silver and Moon City, and they were Mr. Fool's loyal believers. Perhaps, Mr. Fool would one day bestow the identity, status, authority, and power of Sea God to one of them. There are 2 Grade 0 sealed artifacts in the City of Silver, a Sequence 3 Saint, 3 Sequence 4 Saints, and nearly 10 Grade 1 sealed artifacts, as well as a few demigod beyonder characteristics that can temporarily be used as Grade 1 sealed artifacts. There are 3 demigods in Moon City, 5 Grade 1 sealed artifacts, and a large number of potion formulas. Alger only made a slight calculation before realizing that the 2 factions that came under Mr. Fool were a little terrifying. All of them combined was equivalent to a quarter of the Church of Storms. According to what Alger knew, the number of Grade 0 sealed artifacts each church had numbered between 5 to 8. There were fewer than 4 grounded angels active at present. In this aspect, they were indeed much stronger than the combined Moon City and City of Silver. However, the Orthodox churches had no advantage in numbers when it came to Grade 1 sealed artifacts and saints, especially the latter. Due to an all-out war, with the brass increasing the number of saints by nurturing them, the Church of Storms only had around 20 saints. The Church of the Sea God doesn't have a demigod yet, but it won't be long before a new sea god will appear. As for the angels under Mr. Fool, there's the World, the Death Consul, and the Angel of the Fate Pathway. There are the saints from our tarot club. The more Alger thought about it, the more alarmed he became. He realized that he was a little slow in this aspect. Perhaps it was because he couldn't extricate himself to take an objective look at things, and although he had always been amazed by such matters, he finally came to a clear realization today. Unknowingly, Mr. Fool's faction had already developed to a level that was comparable to an Orthodox church. Even if there was a certain gap, it was only due to the lack of accumulation that needed to span across years. And it hadn't even been 3 years since Alger joined the Tarot Club. If I hadn't experienced all these changes myself, I definitely wouldn't have believed it. Alger sighed inwardly as he fervently wished to do something for Mr. Fool, so that he could quickly accumulate the contributions needed to transform into Sea God. When that happened, he could truly cast his gaze towards the Book of Calamity and attempt to complete the request of the Elven Queen, Kohainam. Retracting his gaze, Alger glanced at Byam at the foot of the mountain. He saw that this city, which hadn't suffered any serious damage in the war, had once again lit up. It could also be called the most prosperous city in the Sonia Sea. At that moment, the priests, bishops, and believers of the Church of the Lord of Storms were cooperating with the new government civil servants and the Church of Sea God to build schools and hospitals to the children in the slums and the natives with no financial capacity that would provide education, medical treatment, and assistance. As Alger watched the people walking along the streets like ants and the colorful buildings that were different from the vast majority of Lone, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly before he wiped away his smile. He narrowed his eyes, unsure what he was experiencing or enjoying. At that moment, a grayish-white fog suddenly appeared in front of him. Following that, he saw the ancient palace and blurry figure in the middle of the fog. He heard Mr. Fool's words. A mission. Monitor a man named Verdu Garcia. Along with the revelation, plenty of miscellaneous information rained down and drilled into Alger's mind, allowing him to know the exact situation of Verdu Garcia. He was a member of the Abraham family that had concealed his identity. He had recently left Desi County and had come to the Rorstad archipelago. Alger was thrilled. He bowed his head respectfully in response. By your will. Klein knew that Verdu Garcia Abraham had left the northern continent and was heading to the Rorstad archipelago, as Dorian Gray had mentioned this when he prayed. He knew very well that the person named Verdu yearned to save Mr. Dor so that the King of Angels could return to the real world. The reason why Klein had gotten Miss Magician to inform the Abraham family of one of the rituals that helped Mr. Dor escape was because the trust between the two parties was insufficient. If he were to hide it or lie by saying that an angel needed to be hunted for the ritual, the Abraham family would definitely suspect Furs and make her continue contacting Mr. Dor and try to confirm it through other means. Once they discovered anything, Klein would lose control of the Abraham family, preventing him from nipping the problem in the bud. If it had been a few years ago, Klein wouldn't have been too worried about such problems. However, as the apocalypse approached, the infiltration of the outer deities would only increase. It was possible that a member of the Abraham family would come into contact with a corresponding item or believer and obtain the correct ritual. Therefore, Klein believed that the ritual that was extremely difficult to complete could be used to effectively gain the trust of the Abrahams, allowing them to deepen their faith in Mr. Fool and become more devout. Then he could monitor the extreme ones among the devout and grasp their trajectories, and interfere with them in time. Chapter 13:12 Fully Automatic Wishing Machine Mid-Seashire. Limon City. Jasmine wrapped a scarf around her face and exited the apartment. She had heard that the annual Limon Carnival had begun, so she wanted to visit it at the municipal square. Because of the war last year, the carnival hadn't been held. This had greatly disappointed Jasmine. After that, she suffered the greatest trauma in her life. From then on, she hid at home and didn't dare to go out. Perhaps it was because she had been confined at home for too long, one that was very cramped. Jasmine had been eager to go on the streets recently. She wanted to walk around just like she did in the past. As she turned her gaze, she saw her reflection in the large glass window by the side of the street. Her figure was pitch black without any other color. Her long dress reached her ankles, and the veil of her hat covered half of her face. From the bottom of her eyes to her neck, there was a scarf wrapped several times around her neck. Both of her hands were wearing a pair of knitted gloves. This was completely different from the cheerful and lively Jasmine in her memories. In the previous war, a cannonball had destroyed her original home and resulted in a fire. She suffered burns to the face, causing her body to be covered in wounds. If not for the fact that she was lucky enough, Jasmine would have died from the serious injuries. But even so, she felt like her life had ended from that very moment. Her nose had been burnt away, leaving only 2 black holes. There were many traces left behind by the fire on her face, neck, and hands. If she were to walk in the dark, she would pass off for a devil perfectly. Jasmine clearly remembered one thing. On the first night of moving to this apartment, she had washed up in the public bathroom before sleeping. Just as she walked out of the door, she saw a youth walk over. The youth had also seen her. Under the crimson moonlight, the youth revealed an expression of extreme horror, as if he would jump up at any moment. He turned around and ran away. Finally, he controlled himself and took a few steps to the side, not daring to look at Jasmine's face again. This pierced through Jasmine's fragile heart. From that day onwards, she never left the house again. Even if she had to wash up, she would wait until it was late at night. In this aspect, she was very grateful to her parents because they didn't say a word. They did their best to maintain their lives, relying on their original savings and the work they later found to barely support the family. They didn't need Jasmine to work outside for a salary. After walking a distance, Jasmine saw the main venue of the carnival, Lemon City Municipal Square. There was a sea of heads and all kinds of reveling emotions. The enthusiastic atmosphere made Jasmine subconsciously stop in her tracks. She didn't dare approach, afraid that someone would notice that she was dressed strangely, afraid that she might accidentally drop her scarf. After hesitating for a few seconds, she finally stopped. She found a clean spot by the street and sat down. She stared intently at the municipal square. After an unknown period of time, Jasmine sensed someone beside her. It was a young man in a long black robe and a tall hat. He was like a magician from a circus. The municipal square is over there. Jasmine wanted to remind him, but after she quivered her lips a few times, she didn't part them. She didn't dare to speak to anyone. However, the young man took the initiative to walk over. He took off his hat and bowed slightly. "Miss, do you know what this machine is for?" "Machine?" Jasmine subconsciously looked up and dazedly followed the young man's gaze. Under the street lamp, a small wardrobe-like machine was sitting there at some point in time. Its surface was a brass color with a few transparent glass, gears, and bearings embedded in it. The components were exposed, looking very crude. Jasmine retracted her gaze and shook her head, indicating that she didn't know what the machine was. At the same time, this also expressed her intention to reject conversing. "It's called a fully automatic wishing machine," the young man introduced with a smile. "It's my invention. It can automatically fulfill the wish of someone who operates it. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Merlin Hermes, a wandering magician." Fully automatic wishing machine. Jasmine realized that she could understand every single word but failed to understand the combined name. You can give it a try. As the first user to experience it, it's free, Klein, who had taken on the identity of Merlin Hermes, said with a smile. Jasmine shook her head, refusing the conversation. Klein didn't give up. He looked at her and said, "For example, you can make a wish to be restored with your original looks." These words were like a sharp arrow that shot into Jasmine's heart. She stood up in shock and retreated hastily in an attempt to leave. She suspected that he had already seen her current appearance. If you don't give it a try, how do you know that your wish won't come true? It's free, Klein said unhurriedly as he looked past her into the background. Jasmine gradually slowed down and finally stopped. If she could be restored with her original looks, even if she had to pay a huge sum of money, she would still be willing to do so. However, she knew that the wish in her heart couldn't be granted by money. I don't have to pay anything. It's a free try. What if it comes true? Jasmine's thoughts were in an upheaval, and she slowly turned around as if she was being enticed by a devil. Really? She asked in a hoarse voice. Klein pointed at the machine. I can retreat 10 meters, and all you need to do is to turn the wrench on the machine. You don't have to remove your hat and scarf. The last sentence moved Jasmine into action as she quickly nodded and said, "Okay." Not long after Merlin retreated a certain distance, Jasmine moved closer to the machine, gingerly grasping the wrench on the door. She was actually very worried that this was part of a prank that involved pulling the wrench, such as being splashed by water. This was something that would happen every year during the carnival. She and her friends had often played such pranks on others, but compared to a wish that could be fulfilled, she felt that it was an acceptable risk. Even if it was proven that having her wish granted was impossible, it could still be treated as her experience at the carnival. Remember to make your wish before you turn it, Klein reminded her from not too far away. Jasmine collected her thoughts and silently voiced her wish. I want to return to my former self before the burns. With that, she turned the wrench nervously and expectantly. In the next second, the door to the fully automatic wishing machine opened. A normal wooden cane reached out and tapped Jasmine's forehead. What Jasmine didn't notice was a golden ring embedded with rubies that had appeared on her hand. When the wooden cane retracted back into the fully automatic wishing machine, the golden ring with the rubies disappeared as well. As the gears turned, Jasmine saw the machine's door slowly close. That's it? She thought blankly. She didn't experience the feeling of having her wish fulfilled, nor was she being pranked. Everything seemed so strange. Congratulations. Your wish has been granted. Klein walked back and clapped gently like a witness to a magical event. My wish has been granted. How is this possible? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, she suddenly felt something beneath her scarf. The spot where there were only 2 black holes left had been propped up. Jasmine slowly raised her hand and touched her face, clearly sensing the presence of her nose. And the quality of her breathing proved this point. She suddenly turned around, her back facing Merlin Hermes. She walked to a shop by the side of the street and cast her gaze at the glass window. Then, she removed the scarf covering her face. Eyes that weren't big, a nose that wasn't too well defined, and her lips that weren't too full. The freckled face of a girl was reflected on the window. Jasmine subconsciously raised her hand and covered her mouth. Her eyes glistened. After a few seconds, she raised her arm and wiped her face with her sleeve. She turned to look at Merlin Hermes and said, Are you a god? I'm just a magician who likes to create miracles. Klein smiled as he pointed at the machine beside him. The thing you should thank the most is that, the fully automatic wishing machine. Fully automatic. Jasmine's emotions stirred as she subconsciously repeated. Klein nodded and said, Yes, a fully automatic wishing machine that can operate without any external help. You can understand it as a gas meter. As long as you throw in a coin, you can get a wish granted like how you obtain gas. The specific steps are very simple. Throw 1 penny in and make your wish before turning the wrench. Remember, only 3 wishes can be fulfilled. While explaining, Klein inwardly mocked himself. If I were to unfortunately die one day and become a sealed artifact, I hope it's something similar to the fully automatic wishing machine. After leaving the capital of Mid-Sea Shear, Constant City, Klein changed the method of granting other people's wishes to prevent himself from being too bored. One had to learn to seek joy in mundane work. How miraculous! Jasmine couldn't find the words to describe how she felt inside. Her exhilarated emotions calmed down a little. Will it? I mean, will this fully automatic wishing machine stay here forever? Jasmine asked hesitantly. Klein smiled and said, No. It could stay here for 3 days, or maybe not that long. Perhaps it would disappear when the sun rises. But it won't disappear forever. Perhaps one day, you will see it at the corner of the street again. Jasmine's mind was in a mess and she was unable to sort out her thoughts. All she could do was bow to the machine and say seriously, Thank you, Mr. Fully Automatic Wishing Machine. Then she bowed at Klein. Thank you, Mr. Hermes. As soon as she said that, Jasmine recalled the words Merlin Hermes had just said. Filled with anticipation, surprise, and embarrassment, she asked, 3 wishes can be granted? Yes, but it won't be free in the future. You will need to pay a penny, Klein replied, unfazed by the question. Chapter 13:13. The third wish. Jasmine was excited, but she was still worried. What kind of price has to be paid? From her point of view, a prior free attempt didn't mean that the subsequent wishes were without a price. Klein adjusted his tall hat and smiled. The penny you paid is the price. The corresponding change that you have to bear after achieving your wish is also the price. Jasmine nodded without completely understanding him. Without any hesitation, she reached into her pocket and attempted to take out a few copper pennies for her wish. However, her pocket was empty except for a handkerchief. Having stayed home all this while, she hadn't had any contact with money. She had relied on walking to go from home to the municipal square instead of taking a trackless public carriage. Aye. Can I go home first? Jasmine asked, both vexed and embarrassed. Of course, this is your freedom, but I can't guarantee that the fully automatic wishing machine will always be waiting for you here, Klein said with the tone of a magician. Sometimes it's very willful. Jasmine tersely answered, thanked him, and turned around, jogging in the opposite direction of the municipal square. The more she ran, the more relaxed her body became. She found herself in her formerly healthy state before she was burnt, transforming back into a teenage girl in her prime. To her, this was a scene that would only appear in a dream. Of course, as an ordinary person, she gradually felt exhausted after running for a while. She had no choice but to slow down and begin walking slowly. The cool night breeze blew, revealing resplendent stars peeking through the clouds high up in the sky. The trees by the side of the street swayed gently and scattered the swaying shadows on the ground. All of this was so quiet and beautiful. Jasmine only felt her body and mind relax, and all her worries disappeared. This was the first time she was in such a good mood ever since she was injured. Unknowingly, a smile appeared on her face. After walking for about 5 minutes, she suddenly heard someone shout her name. Hey, Jasmine. Jasmine turned her head and saw a familiar face. It was her former neighbor, Mrs. Hamill. Good evening, Mrs. Hamill. I haven't seen you in a long time. Are you going to the carnival? Jasmine, who wasn't wearing a scarf, said with a heartfelt smile. Mrs. Hamill was a woman with a head of white hair. She carefully sized up Jasmine and said, I haven't seen you since you moved away. I heard that you were injured in the previous blast? Yes, but I've recovered. Jasmine nodded heavily. She then asked, How is Jolie now? Jolie was Mrs. Hamill's eldest daughter, and was her former playmate. Mrs. Hamill's expression instantly wore a shade of gloom. The Phasacians did unspeakable things to her, and she ended up dying. Jasmine was taken aback, thinking back to her experience while feeling sad. A Phasacian soldier had rushed into her house in an attempt to do unspeakable things to her, but he only gave her a kick and left when he saw her disfigured face. Poor Jolie. Jasmine sincerely tapped her chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion, outlining the stars. It was only after she heard what had happened to her friend that she realized that she might have been relatively lucky. After bidding farewell to Mrs. Hamill, Jasmine walked back to her apartment. When she got home, she felt much better and her mood was back to normal. She started to look forward to the expression her parents would have when they saw her appearance restored. They probably wouldn't keep the pain deep in their hearts and pretend that nothing has happened. They would definitely cry with joy and hug me. Jasmine took the key that was hanging around her neck like a necklace, and as she thought about it, she opened the door. The room was dark. None of the candles or the gas wall lamps were lit. On the bed outside, light and heavy snoring could be heard from her parents, forming a contrast with the bustling municipal square. They're asleep. Yes, they've been working hard. Jasmine gently closed the door and walked to her parents' bed. With the crimson moonlight shining in through the window, she cast her gaze over. Daddy has a lot of white hair, and his wrinkles have deepened. Mommy keeps frowning when she sleeps. Her face is flaking. It's dry and coarse. Only then did Jasmine realize that she hadn't seriously looked at her parents' faces for a long time. She didn't know that they had aged so much. Before the war, her father was an accountant with a pretty good income. They could afford to rent a terrace house and allow his wife to not work so as to focus on taking care of the family. But now, he could only work at textile factories and do all kinds of strenuous labor. Jasmine's mother had no choice but to leave her family and become a textile worker. Daddy's health is getting worse and worse. He's always coughing, but he has passed the recent Civil Servant Unified examination. When the interview results are announced, he will have a decent job. Mommy keeps complaining that her arm is getting worse. Jasmine looked at her parents intently and didn't wake them up. She had already thought of her second wish. Softening her footsteps, Jasmine entered the room inside and poured out the last few pennies from her piggy bank that she had previously almost emptied. Then, she left the apartment and boarded a trackless public carriage. She was afraid that the fully automatic wishing machine would be gone if she delayed any further. At that moment, there were a lot of passengers on the public carriage. Most of them were heading to participate in the carnival. Jasmine looked around and saw that there were no seats, so she had no choice but to support herself as she stood on the aisle, squeezing with plenty of people. 10 minutes later, she reached her stop and turned into that street. When the brass-colored machine embedded with a few pieces of glass appeared before her eyes, Jasmine silently heaved a sigh of relief and quickly approached. During this process, she surveyed her surroundings and didn't find the magician by the name of Merlin Hermes. It really is fully automatic. There's no need for him to be by my side? Jasmine muttered in puzzlement. She didn't waste any time. She took out a penny and placed it inside the fully automatic wishing machine. I wish for my parents to be healthy again. I hope that my family will become rich. Jasmine softly voiced her wish. She closed her eyes and waited for the miracle to happen. In the next second, she heard the clanging sound as though a coin had rolled out from the fully automatic wishing machine. Jasmine opened her eyes in shock and looked ahead, only to see that the penny she had just put into the machine had landed on a small tray around the coin slot. This wish can't be fulfilled? A wish can't contain too much content? My wish was actually 2 wishes. With the experience of being cured of her burns, Jasmine didn't suspect that there was something wrong with the fully automatic wishing machine. She thought seriously and stuffed the penny into the coin slot. Then, she lowered her head and made a wish softly. I hope my parents are healthy again. This time, she heard a soft knock sound out from the fully automatic wishing machine. Tack! Seeing that the copper coin remained inside the machine, Jasmine knew that her wish had been fulfilled. She couldn't wait to go home and check on her parents' situation. Suppressing her excitement, she inserted another penny. She had originally planned on making her family wealthy, but remembering that her father was basically going to become a civil servant in Limon City, and that her family income was guaranteed, she couldn't help but have other thoughts about it. When she was 10 years old, she already knew that she wasn't good-looking. It wasn't that people around her would despise her and say that she wasn't good-looking, but amongst her playmates, there were 2 rather beautiful girls. This allowed them to be accorded with greater treatment and experience the kindness of the world. Such a comparison only served to make Jasmine inevitably dream of becoming prettier as she grew older. But reality proved that dreams could only be dreams. However, this time, her dream could turn into reality, because she had a miraculous fully automatic wishing machine in front of her. If I can make myself beautiful, I can find a good husband, and I can improve my family situation. Jasmine seemed to have heard the devil whispering in her ear. She closed her eyes uncontrollably and made a wish. I wish to become extremely, extremely, extremely beautiful. She used extremely thrice to accentuate the beauty she wanted. Just as she finished speaking, the door to the fully automatic wishing machine opened once again. A silver-white mask was pushed out and covered her face. Jasmine quickly opened her eyes and happened to see the mask disappear. At the same time, she felt something connect to her. She turned around in anticipation and once again walked to the shop by the side of the street. Using the light from the gas lamps and the glass on the window, she saw her current appearance. For a moment, Jasmine couldn't describe the exact changes in her facial features and outline. All she knew was that at this moment even she was mesmerized by her beauty. Her nose had become sharper and her lips had become fuller. Her eyes became bigger and limpid. Her skin was as tender as milk pudding. She only had slight similarities to her previous self. Is this a miracle? Jasmine couldn't help but let out a heartfelt sigh of amazement. She looked at herself, intoxicated. It took her great effort to finally retract her gaze before bowing at the fully automatic wishing machine. Following that, she walked towards the public carriage stop. On the way, eyes kept turning to look at her. Bang! A man, who was too focused on her, slammed into a gas lamp post. Jasmine pursed her lips into a smile. Without a word, she boarded the trackless public carriage. There were still many people on board, and all the seats were taken. Just as Jasmine was trying her best to find a spot, several men lifted their buttocks and straightened their bodies. They looked at her and smiled. "Miss, you can sit here." Jasmine was momentarily stunned. She hadn't expected to receive so much kindness. She didn't decline and sat down. She smiled at the man who had given up his seat. "Thank you." The man's expression became extremely animated as he said humbly, "This is what a gentleman should do." Jasmine still retained the habits from when she was previously cooped up at home, so she didn't say anything else. She quietly sat there until she reached the stop near her apartment. Then, she got off the carriage. After a few steps, she suddenly felt that someone was looking at her. She quickly turned her head to look. It was a drunkard. He was staring at Jasmine with an indescribably disgusting look. Jasmine jumped in fright and briskly walked to her apartment. However, the men she met along the way revealed similar looks, as though they could turn into beasts at any moment. At that moment, Jasmine felt as though she was walking in the wilderness. Previously, Jasmine enjoyed the gazes from the men, but now, all that was left was anxiety and horror. She hastened her footsteps again as though she was being chased by phasations. Finally, before the men could get close to her, she rushed into the apartment and got rid of them. Phew! The girl patted her chest and secretly decided to stay out less at night. Only then did she realize that extraordinary beauty had its disadvantages. After calming down, Jasmine went up the dimly lit stairs to the third floor and returned home. She used the key she carried with her to open the door. She carefully approached her parents' bed and used the moonlight to examine their faces. Compared to when she left the house not too long ago, her parents' faces were rather ruddy. Their white hair and wrinkles had lessened significantly, and their snoring was almost non-existent. Their health has really been restored. Jasmine couldn't help but smile, clearly relieved. Sensing the commotion, her mother's eyelids twitched as she slowly opened her eyes. Jasmine held her breath and restrained her smile, preparing to give her mother a surprise. Her mother sat up and looked over, her expression suddenly becoming extremely terrified. "Who are you?" asked the woman with a shrill voice as she shoved her husband forcefully. "Who am I?" Jasmine was stunned by the question and didn't know how to answer the simple question. At that moment, her father woke up as well. He looked at the beautiful girl in front of him with suspicion and vigilance. "Get out! Otherwise, I'll call the police." Jasmine's mother left the bed and picked up a candle stand beside her, using it as a weapon. "We don't welcome burglars." Jasmine's father rather politely issued an order for Jasmine to leave. He knew that he had to do his best not to pressure the burglar. Otherwise, it easily led to extreme responses from the other party. If not for his wife and daughter, he wasn't too afraid of fighting the burglar. But now, his entire family was at stake. Jasmine finally snapped out of her daze and hurriedly said, "Daddy, Mommy, I am..." Before she could finish her sentence, her mother started to shove her repeatedly as she was pushed out of the room by her father. No one cared about what she said. Under such circumstances, no one cared. Thud. The door to her apartment closed before her very eyes. It left her feeling lost and helpless. She wanted to knock on the door and use the key she carried with her to prove her identity, but at that moment, she heard her mother shout to a patrolling police officer downstairs, "There's a burglar, a burglar!" Burglar. Daddy and Mommy don't recognize me anymore. Will they think that I've murdered myself? Will the police believe the fully automatic wishing machine? Jasmine's heart tightened, and she subconsciously decided to leave the apartment first to avoid the police. She would then find her father and mother to explain to them carefully at dawn and use their common memories to convince them. Tap, tap, tap. She bowed her head and under the watchful gazes of her neighbors, walked down the stairs and rushed out of the building. She ran all the way to a nearby alley and avoided the approaching police officer from the main street. Gasping for air, Jasmine stopped in her tracks. Tears uncontrollably rolled down her face and fell to the ground. Suddenly, a hand reached over and covered her mouth, dragging her to a secluded corner of the alley. "How much?" "I'll pay however much it costs." A voice filled with drunkenness rang in Jasmine's ears. It was as if he had mistaken her for a prostitute and could no longer resist her allure. Jasmine tried her best to struggle, alarmed, afraid, and desperate. Just as she was about to break down, the drunkard released his hand. "Miss, are you all right?" A hoarse male voice sounded. Jasmine dashed away from the drunkard before turning around to see a police officer in a black and white checkered uniform. He. As Jasmine spoke, she began to cry. The policeman looked at her sympathetically and said, "We will take legal action on him. However, miss, you'll need to return to the police station with me to record your statement." Jasmine was in a state of extreme panic and extreme helplessness. She subconsciously nodded. Not long after, she sat in the police station's testimony room nearby. Facing her was the same police officer and his colleague. The policeman deliberated over his words and asked, "So you're telling me, he didn't ask you if you were a prostitute, and you didn't do anything that might come off as soliciting customers?" He was worried that his words would hurt the beautiful girl in front of him. Jasmine held a coffee cup and lowered her head to take a sip. "Yes, I just reached the alley." "All right, let's end it here. Miss Jasmine, can you tell us where your house is? We will get someone to send you back." Another policeman tried to get in her good books. Recalling his parents' reaction and the disgusting gazes, Jasmine couldn't help but shudder. She said in tears, "I had a quarrel with my parents and can't return home for the time being. Perhaps you can take me to the nearest hotel." At this point, she remembered that she was only left with a few pence. There was no way she could stay in a good hotel, and the cheap motels were practically dangerous to her. The first policeman was taken aback. "Okay." On the way to the nearest hotel, the policeman hesitated several times before finally saying, If you plan on becoming a street girl, you can come to me. There's no need for you to go through that much effort." Upon hearing this, Jasmine felt on the brink of mental collapse. It was just different from when she first saw her face after the fire. This made her feel extremely insecure and she remained silent. Fortunately, the police officer didn't force her and sent her to the entrance of the nearest hotel. "There's no need to go in with me. I'll go by myself." Jasmine rejected the policeman's suggestion of sending her to her room. After the police officer left, she quickly walked out of the hotel without completing the check-in procedures. She wanted to go to the municipal square, to the place where the fully automatic wishing machine was to cancel her previous wish. Such beauty was terrifying. After taking a few steps, Jasmine removed the scarf around her shoulders and wrapped it around her face in layers, just like how she left her home that very night. Back then, there were still burn scars on her face. Her missing nose and damaged lips made her look like a devil. When she arrived at the municipal square on a trackless carriage, she entered the street once again and saw the brass fully automatic wishing machine. Jasmine's heart immediately calmed down. She quickened her pace and arrived in front of the machine. Then, she was at a loss. She didn't know how to cancel her last wish. Your first wish was a free trial, and it wasn't counted in the 3 wishes. So you have one more wish. Jasmine suddenly heard Mr. Merlin Hermes's voice. She turned her head and saw that across the street, under the dim yellow light of the street lamp, the magician wearing a tall hat was looking calmly at her. Good. Jasmine hurriedly took out a copper penny and inserted it into the fully automatic wishing machine. "I hope my previous wish is cancelled," she said with her eyes closed as she gripped the wrench and spun it. Tack! She heard the dull thud once again. When she opened her eyes, she rushed to a nearby shop. She stopped in front of the glass window and removed the scarf wrapped around her face. She saw herself again. She was no longer a pretty girl. Jasmine instantly relaxed, and instinctively turned her head to look at the fully automatic wishing machine, but found that it had disappeared along with Mr. Merlin Hermes. Praise the lady. Thank you, Mr. Hermes. Jasmine sincerely tapped her chest 4 times in a clockwise manner. She used her last copper penny to head home on a trackless public carriage. Along the way, no one gave up their seats to her. When her figure vanished from the street, Klein appeared again, holding a silver mirror with ancient patterns. "Great master, why didn't you add the line that excessive greed will only turn something good into something bad, or wishes always have a price? This will make the whole matter seem even more philosophical. It will be elevated into a fable. On the surface of the mirror, silver words appeared. Klein smiled and said, "The biggest problem was that I couldn't use normal methods to satisfy her extremely, extremely, extremely beautiful wish. I can only adjust her looks to a certain extent. Therefore, I had no choice but to use one of the effects of a sealed artifact that originated from a demoness to graft it onto her. That resulted in her stunning beauty and terrifying charm. This made the surrounding men unable to resist her." The sealed artifact belonged to Zio, a relic of Demonis Charmaine. Due to a problem with Zio's storage abilities, Charmaine's Beyonder characteristic fused with the box containing it, becoming a sealed artifact with shockingly negative effects. This caused Zio's younger brother to look at the box strangely. In order to resolve this problem, Zio made a wish for Mr. Fool to seal the item for her. After saying that casually, Klein looked at the magic mirror. "Rhodes, are you consoling me?" "No, the main problem was that she's too greedy. If she only wanted to become beautiful and didn't add so many extremelies to the wish, then the result would have been pretty good." On the surface of the mirror, silver words quickly appeared. "Indeed. That will be within the extent that can be achieved by Lai." Klein nodded and said to Rhodes, "Lai's adjustments can indeed be permanent, but it's a structure that is ultimately different from the original muscles, skin, and bone structure. After more than a decade, when she's gradually showing signs of age, the adjustments and the differences will slowly magnify, making her face appear rather strange and stiff. That can only be fixed periodically by becoming a faceless." Having said that, Klein smiled and shook his head. "A lie is ultimately a lie." Then he walked towards the other end of the street and continued, "Besides, even if she really becomes beautiful, it's still uncertain whether she will lead a better life in the future. It's true that beauty allows her to obtain a lot of resources and allow her to marry a prince. However, her personal upbringing, character, and knowledge are unlikely to support such a lifestyle. Yes, I can't rule out the possibility that she's good at studying, being capable of using all kinds of experience to fully enrich herself, and ultimately direct herself to possibly having a good life. However, that's a whole other story. Heh, miracles are only for a moment, but fate is often a long-lasting event." In the conversation with Rhodes, Klein gradually vanished from the end of the street. His understanding of Miracle Invoker had deepened again. After returning to her family apartment, Jasmine didn't attempt to open the door. She used a lot of courage to knock on the door. The door opened and her mother appeared in front of her. "Oh, you're finally back." Her mother first heaved a sigh of relief, then asked in an abnormally horrified manner, "Why your face?" Jasmine forced a smile and said, "I've been cured, by a mister who's good at creating miracles. Mr. Fully Automatic Wishing Machine." Just as her parents suspected that their daughter had been influenced by demons, a few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms walked up the stairs and came over. Leading the policeman was a lady. She had light blue eyes and a smile that quietened others. "Miss Jasmine, we have some questions for you," the lady said politely. Chapter 13-15 Summary. Repper Jasmine felt that she should have been afraid, but she found it difficult to have much strong emotions facing the female police officer in front of her. She felt like her body and mind had unknowingly settled down after crying for a long time. She looked at her parents who had a complicated expression and asked hesitantly, "Okay, what questions do you have?" The female policeman with the rank of superintendent pointed at the door and said, "Let's talk inside." She didn't get Jasmine's parents to leave. She only ordered the 2 police officers with her to guard by the door. After closing the door, she pulled a crude round stool over and sat down without standing on ceremony, looking very relaxed. This immediately made Jasmine and her parents less tense. "You may call me Ma'am Gray." The officer introduced herself and pointed at another chair and the bed. "Have a seat." When everyone in the room found their seats, she smiled at Jasmine and said, "I received a report saying that there were some incomprehensible things happening around you. For example, a male's desire for committing sexual assault had far exceeded normal standards. This doesn't mean that there are no bad people or criminals among them, but the ratio is too high, so high that it's strange." At this point, she swept her gaze across Jasmine's face. "From what I know, you were seriously injured during the fire and was permanently disfigured. But now, I can't tell any of that. What do you have to say about this?" Jasmine's heart tensed up again. She didn't dare hide anything and said in a panic, "I went out tonight to the municipal square to attend the carnival. While I was passing by a particular street, I encountered a wandering magician who called himself Merlin Hermes. He said that he had invented a machine called the fully automatic wishing machine. All I had to do was insert a penny, softly state my wish, and turn the wrench, then my wish would be granted. He said that I was the first user, so I could experience it for free once. Then, I was restored to my original state, having all my injuries healed. Officer, that's what happened. You must believe me." With that, she glanced at Mrs. Gray and her assistant before looking at her parents, trying to get their approval. However, her parents clearly said, "How is this possible? How can there be a machine that can automatically grant the wishes of others? How can there be something as good as granting a wish cost only a penny? Besides, the first user experienced it for free." Gray and her assistant didn't show any obvious expressions, making Jasmine unsure if they believed her or not. "Continue." Seeing her pause, Gray nodded encouragingly. Jasmine hurriedly mentioned how she returned home to get some coins before recounting in full how she wished for her parents to regain their health and how she wanted to become beautiful. "Finally," she said, "I was indeed very beautiful. Even I couldn't move my eyes away. This made me experience a lot of kindness, but later on, the surrounding men started to frighten me. In addition, Daddy and Mommy didn't recognize me and chased me out of the house. I was scared, very scared. I returned to the machine and made a third wish. Yes, that Mr. Merlin Hermes said that the first wish was free, and wasn't part of the 3 wishes. In short, I returned to my original appearance and met you." Upon hearing these words, Jasmine's parents instantly thought of the beautiful burglar from before. Then they realized that their bodies were indeed much healthier than before. Their vision had recovered and their arms had sufficient strength. Everything seemed different. They began to believe Jasmine's description, but they felt even more terrified. It was as if they had encountered a demon, exactly the same as those stories in folklore. Gray nodded gently. "I've seen many matters that are beyond your imagination, but this is the first time I've heard of something like a fully automatic wishing machine. Compared to a wishing lamp or wishing pool in folklore, this is too modern." After a pause, her expression turned serious. "As an experienced law enforcer, I'll give you 3 suggestions. First, don't believe in such things again from now on. Under most circumstances, the easy granting of wishes brings about a huge disaster. There's nothing wrong with describing it as the temptation of demons." Jasmine nodded heavily, indicating that she wouldn't dare to do it again. That final experience still left her feeling afraid. Secondly, go to the cathedral as soon as possible and repent to the bishop. Get him to purify you. Gray looked around and said, "Your entire family must go." Seeing that Jasmine and her parents were about to say that they already had this in mind, Gray turned to Jasmine. "My department still lacks some staff. You can consider joining us. This way, I can monitor your situation at any time and deal with any abnormalities in time. As for the salary, trust me, it's about the same as a civil servant." "The salary is about the same as a civil servant's. I can be protected." "There's something that nice?" Jasmine asked in disbelief. "What department is it?" Gray smiled and said, "I'll give you an address. Come to my office tomorrow, and I'll fill you in on the details." "All right." Jasmine was in a state of panic and unease. She would grab a life-saving straw the moment it appeared. A week later, Jasmine officially joined the Nighthawks in Limon City and became a civilian staff member. "Captain, the telegraph device has broken down," she said carefully as she knocked on Gray's door. Gray put down the documents in her hand and rubbed her temples. "Report this to the police station and let them handle it. Seriously, I could have gotten the help of the machinery hive mind in the past. It was done in a quick and effective way." Now sigh. By the time Jasmine left, Gray picked up the documents and began to read them carefully. This was a piece of information that the Nighthawks had gathered regarding the fully automatic wishing machine. After Jasmine, this happened more than once. After flipping through the documents, Gray spread out a piece of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and began writing the official document for the Constant Archbishop and the Holy Cathedral. There have been many supernatural incidents in the city in the past week. It involves a special machine called the fully automatic wishing machine. According to the intel, It was created by a wandering magician who calls himself Merlin Hermes. But we haven't ruled out other possibilities. At least, I think that Merlin might be an illusion created by this machine, so as to lure people into making wishes. This machine is of a brass color embedded with opaque glass. Its surface has gears, bearings, rivets, metal pipes, and other components exposed on its surface. It seems to be a product of modern industrialization. Case 1. A young girl who was disfigured by a fire had met the fully automatic wishing machine at the municipal square. Her first wish was to revert back to her original appearance, and it was granted normally. Her second wish was to restore her parents' health, which was also granted normally. Her third wish was to become extremely beautiful. Then, she no longer looked like herself, and she had an irresistible charm to the men around her. She claimed that she was the first user of fully automatic wishing machine, which allowed her to have one free wish. With that, she cancelled her third wish. Case 2. A retired soldier who participated in the war to defend Limon was left with serious mental damage. He met the fully automatic wishing machine by the river. His first wish was to restore his mental state to a state before the war, and it was granted normally. His second wish was to become a little more handsome so as to reach the standards of the male models on magazine covers. He also had it granted normally. His third wish was to obtain £100,000 and become a tycoon. Then, he caught the fancy of the owner of the Limon United Steel Company, who wished to marry him, a lady with a wealth of nearly £200,000. This retired soldier didn't wish to accept her with her having a weight of more than 200 pounds and her shorter than average height. Furthermore, she's a violent middle-aged woman. He prepared to leave Limon and head south. If there comes a day when he doesn't want to work hard anymore, he can easily obtain the rights to a wealth of £100,000. In a sense, his wish was granted, but he's unwilling to accept it. Case 3. Case 4. Case 5. A public school teacher met the fully automatic wishing machine near a storm cathedral. Her first wish was to make herself look better, and not be ostracized by her students because of her looks or be spurned by her colleagues. This was granted normally. Her second wish was to obtain a better position, which was also granted. As her teaching standards were high enough and she was no longer restricted by her looks, she quickly became the most popular teacher among the students and began taking on the duties as vice principal. Her third wish was to have a husband with impeccable looks, family background, personality, and ability. Finally, she got a doll who could speak, move, and have a certain level of intelligence. It had living characteristics and looked rather handsome. It was carved by the best master and could have any personality one wanted. It was very capable in every aspect. Other than not being human, it really had no flaws. Case 6. Summarizing these cases, we have obtained some preliminary guesses. The fully automatic wishing machine can appear anywhere in Limon. It's extremely random, and there's temporarily no discovered pattern for it. Most of the wishes that are made can be fulfilled normally. However, a small portion will be distorted, and the latter is basically concentrated on the third wish. Of course, it's also possible that the person will let themselves loose by the time they make the third wish and thus make excessive demands. The wishes it granted were mostly related to appearance, but it covered a wide scope. It was almost omnipotent. The frequency of its appearances is also irregular. This is a classic example of a mystical item that needs to be sealed. Furthermore, it clearly exceeds the grade of a Grade 2 sealed artifact. I hope the Archbishop and high-ranking deacons will personally deal with it, or give an effective sealing method. On the steam locomotive out of Limon, Klein observed his digestion of the Miracle Invoker Potion. Chapter 13:16 An unknown city. If I keep accumulating it bit by bit, it won't be long before I can respond to Moon City's prayers and cure their deformity, thus creating quite a miracle. In addition, I've also concluded the acting principles of a miracle invoker. It's only a matter of time before I digest it if I follow them. I might even finish within the year. Klein retracted his gaze from outside the window, raised his left arm, and controlled the monster puppet on his hand to entertain a child across him. This made him look more like a wandering magician. If he was willing, he could even use Life's Cane or the grafting ability to imbue this sock puppet with living characteristics. While entertaining the child, Klein's thoughts scattered as he considered where the marionette city needed to be built for the advancement ritual. A marionette city needs sufficient interaction to develop a corresponding region in the spirit world. This means that it isn't enough to leave it in the forsaken land of the gods. Ignoring the fact that it's sealed there, there's no way of directly connecting it to the spirit world. All I can do is rely on the little specialness it has. Even if there's no problem with it, it's difficult to create any interactivity with a place that lacks intelligent life. If it's placed in the northern and southern continent or the sea colonies, I have to be careful. Before the ritual is about to succeed, I definitely can't expose the fact that it's a marionette city. Otherwise, it will be affected, damaged, or even attacked by Zeratul, Amon, and my other enemies. Yes, I have to give a sufficiently good reason for a marionette city to appear. Then, there won't be any abnormalities with the interaction between the traveling merchants and the surrounding humans. I have to make every marionette a living person. They have their past, present, and future. They follow their own trajectories of fate. This means that a marionette city is extremely complicated. I need to split out many worms of spirit to deal with it. This also has the risk of losing control by doing so. If they are husband and wife, they should act like husband and wife. When faced with something they are fond of, they should show joy. Perverts should be hated. This way, foreigners might hear embarrassing sounds while staying in the marionette city. I'm still just an innocent child. This is a large-scale reality show, or rather, a high-end version of Playing House. It has to be able to deceive the audience. As Klein lampooned inwardly, he silently counted if he had enough marionettes. Previously, he had gone to the forsaken land of the gods several times and converted a large number of them. There were all kinds of monsters that might not have Beyonder characteristics. He also consciously controlled batches of rats, cockroaches, mosquitoes and flies, hoping to make a more uncommon side of the city real enough. I'm barely able to support a small city, so just a few more visits to the forsaken land of the gods would do. Just as this thought flashed through Klein's mind, a scene suddenly appeared in front of him. At the top of the giant king's court, which was bathed in the light of dusk, the open door slowly and heavily closed. This was like a pair of invisible hands closing the entrance to the forsaken land of the gods. Klein's eyes darkened as he vaguely guessed that this scene meant that the true creator was about to seal off the forsaken land of the gods again. This was the prophetic power that came from his angel-level spiritual intuition and premonition for danger. It was about to happen a few minutes or a few seconds later. Did the true creator capture Amon? Or has he already given up? He once again sealed off the forsaken land of the gods. Does he not want others to enter again? Isn't this too petty? Klein mumbled inwardly, feeling a little disappointed. Of course, he barely had enough marionettes. Even if he lacked them, he could make up for it at sea. Backlund. Empress Burrow. Audrey had just changed her clothes and sent away her maidservants. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Susie walk in. What's the matter? You should be out on your stroll at this time? As an experienced spectator, Audrey immediately sensed that something was amiss. During this period of time, she had been busy making use of the influence she had in a few foundations to help the workers, farmers, and injured veterans with their hardships. She had allowed them to wait for a new job opportunity or for their plantation's production in a new season. She had a lot less interaction with Susie than usual. At the same time, Audrey was secretly guiding the workers of lower socioeconomic status from the various unions in Backlund to gather their strength together. Her previous experiences made her understand that counting on the kindness of the upper class wasn't reliable or long-lasting. A single person appeared puny and powerless in the face of the government, nobles, and powerful merchants. Only by summoning the combined strength of a large number of civilians could a balance be formed. The Lone Kingdom had unions in different industries a long time ago, but the upper echelons of these associations were easily bribed. Instead, they became effective weapons against ordinary workers. Susie glanced at Audrey with a rather normal expression, but her mouth seemed to be out of control. It vibrated the air and let out a deep male voice. Miss Audrey, I'm the president of the Psychology Alchemists, Eric Drake. I wish to meet you and discuss with you about becoming a counselor of the Psychology Alchemists. I'm at the nearby park. Having said that, Susie heaved a long sigh of relief and regained her original voice. Audrey, there's a strange guy looking for you. I can't remember what he looks like. He directly placed the words he wanted to say into my mind island. Audrey's pupils dilated slightly before immediately returning to normal. She calmly nodded and said, Where is he at the park? As she spoke, Audrey secretly conjured a virtual persona and entered Susie's mind island through the sea of collective subconscious. She checked if it was still distorted by some external consciousness or knowledge. "I don't remember. I was having my stroll," Susie said as she recalled. Then she wagged her tail slightly and said, "I don't think you should go. It's dangerous." After confirming that Susie didn't have any latent problems with her virtual persona, Audrey exhaled and said, "It will be even more suspicious if I don't go. That way, danger will be unavoidable. It might even affect the rest of the people in the house. Besides, this is also an opportunity. Just as Mr. Hangman said, since the end of the world is coming, all the hard work and attempts that will not bring disaster are meaningful." Audrey added inwardly before saying, "I will protect myself." "Susie, did anything happen to you just now?" Susie barked and said, "No, Audrey, are you really going?" "Yes." Audrey gave a clear answer. "Then can you bring me along?" "Just like before, I'm just a dog in their eyes," Susie mustered up her courage and said. "No, there's no need. I'll be back very soon." "Believe me, I'll be blessed by a deity," Audrey replied with a faint smile. After comforting Susie, she used her psychological invisibility and left the luxurious villa like she usually did. When she was far away, in a corner on the first floor, a servant who was cleaning suddenly bowed his head and softly said words that he had never learned before. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." In the ancient palace above the fog, the figure sitting in the fool's seat naturally looked at the newly formed prayer light and realized that the believer was extremely unfamiliar. It's identical to Miss Justice's home environment. I can suspect that it's a result of guidance created by a virtual persona's invasion of the Mind Island. Miss Justice used this method to avoid any surveillance and pray for blessings. The figure quickly came to a conclusion and transferred the corresponding situation to his true body. A few seconds later, Klein entered Sapphira Castle and allowed the worms of spirit to burrow into his body. Miss Justice is becoming more and more like a high-sequence spectator. Klein praised inwardly as he cast his gaze at the crimson star representing justice. In the park with a lake. As soon as Audrey entered, she saw a large carriage drive over. The carriage driver was an ordinary middle-aged man wearing an old hat and a dark-colored jacket. However, in Audrey's eyes, this carriage driver didn't exist because he didn't have a corresponding island of consciousness or mind. In other words, the carriage driver was just an illusion, a fake, and the controller of the carriage was the horse itself. A few seconds later, the large carriage stopped in front of Audrey. The door creaked open. "Please come in." A deep male voice came from inside. Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt slightly and boarded the carriage. She saw a man sitting on a black wheelchair. His pale yellow eyebrows were long and his hair was neatly combed back. There were some wrinkles on his forehead, and his face was abnormally pale. "Mr. Derlau? Aren't you already dead?" Audrey recognized the man in front of her and expressed her surprise perfectly. To a spectator, death only represents the end of one's identity. In other theatrical plays, "I'm still alive," the elderly gentleman who was sitting in a black wheelchair replied with a smile. Apart from the former royal family's medical consultant, the former chancellor of Backlund Medical School, I'm also king of the Black Throne Barrows Hopkins at sea. I'm the famous hermit, Eric Drake, etc. Then how should I address you? Audrey asked politely as she watched the door close automatically from the corner of her eye. The old gentleman stroked the wheels on both sides of his wheelchair and said, "You can call me Mr. President, or you can continue calling me Mr. Derlau." He then pointed to the seat on the left side of the carriage. "Have a seat. Let's head somewhere first before discussing you becoming a counselor of the psychology alchemists." Audrey nodded slightly and calmly sat down. Without hiding anything, she cast her gaze out of the window and was surprised to find that in the blink of an eye, the park had turned into an unfamiliar city, one that was shrouded in darkness. The city was filled with extremely mysterious and beautiful buildings that gave off a dark feeling. There were gentlemen wearing top hats and trench coats, as well as women in complicated and dark dresses. As Audrey swept her gaze, she saw a gentleman with short black hair beside a carriage, revealing sharp canine fangs in his mouth. This was a werewolf. Chapter 13:17, Pride. What is this place? Audrey asked without much change in her expression, as though she was asking about the location of the ball tonight. Polly Derlau, who claimed to be the president of the psychology alchemists, cast his gaze out the window as well. He smiled and said, "This is the city in everyone's heart. It's present wherever there are people." Audrey nodded in thought. In other words, you can enter this place from any corner of human society? Derlau stroked his wheelchair and said, "That's right." He didn't explain further and instead pointed at the pedestrians outside the carriage. Everything here has a corresponding psychological symbol. They are called bestial desire. Bestial desire. Audrey repeated the word silently. As she maintained her dignified posture, she cast her gaze even further. Among the pedestrians, there were werewolves, as well as walking upright bears. There were cats with lazy expressions, and there was a strange man with the face of a spotted spider, a huge mouse with red eyes, a python with its tongue sticking out, and a canine creature that studied every creature that passed it by with eyes filled with a desire to mate. They were either wearing a top hat and trench coat or an exquisite and complicated long dark dress, doing their best to imitate humans in every detail, but they were unable to truly resemble a human. The carriage traveled through the darkness of the night, traveling between pedestrians and all kinds of Gothic buildings. Soon, they arrived at a cathedral in the middle of the city. The cathedral was more than 80 meters tall, propped up thanks to the numerous black columns. Each pillar was embedded with a certain number of skulls. Some of them came from humans, while others came from different creatures. However, their empty eye sockets were tilted downwards, as though they were observing at every living creature that entered the cathedral. Just like most buildings here, every detail in the cathedral could be said to be exquisite, but they formed the elements that leaned towards nightmare, horror, terror, and mystery. After getting off the carriage, Audrey saw a grand but empty hall through the main door. In the depths of the hall stood a huge cross. Curled around the cross was a grayish-white dragon statue. Unlike ordinary cathedrals, there were no pews for believers to pray, nor were there places for candle stands. However, in front of the dragon statue, there was a small long table. On both sides of the long table were 5 seats, and the seats at both ends were empty. Polly Derlau wheeled himself to the end of the long table where the seat of honor was. Then, he pointed to his left. "Please take a seat." Audrey slowly followed behind him. She looked around and casually pulled out a chair before sitting down. She wasn't too close to the president of the psychology alchemists, nor was she too far away. She perfectly showed her vigilance and didn't show any signs of guilt. Polly Derlau raised his hands and clasped them together before placing them on the surface of the long table. "Miss Audrey, I have something to ask you. Please speak." Audrey turned her head slightly and responded with her green eyes. Derlau nodded slightly and said, "I would like to know how you advanced to sequence 4 manipulator. Where did you get your potion formula and beyonder characteristic?" Audrey replied frankly, "It was from a deal. A client wished to receive the help of a spectator demigod, and had paid the manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic as an advance." Derlau immediately laughed. "That actually happened? These generous conditions resemble a father finding an excuse to give his daughter a present. Can you tell me exactly what kind of help you provided?" "Kill another demigod. In this matter, control of one's mind was rather crucial." Audrey simply explained. Her attitude was very calm, as if she was talking about the homework given to her by a teacher. Derlau's long and fluffy eyebrows twitched as he said, "And you succeeded? The results are obvious enough." Audrey gave an answer rather tactfully. Derlau sized her up and realized that the noble girl on his left was a manipulator who could kill other demigods. Audrey read his thoughts and added, "I was just one of the participants." Derlau nodded and said, "Do you know where the client's manipulator potion formula and beyonder characteristic came from?" "He didn't tell me straight with regards to this question." Audrey gave an answer with a sentence she had long planned out. "He. Can you tell me who he is?" Derlau asked after some deliberation. Audrey had been guarding against the other party's virtual persona from infiltrating her mind island. However, she had yet to notice anything abnormal since the beginning. This made her suspect that the other party didn't need to infiltrate her mind. All he needed to do was observe the fluctuations of the surrounding sea of collective subconscious to understand her true thoughts. She didn't make any attempts to hide and calmly replied, "This concerns an agreement between us. I believe honoring one's promise is a moral standard that the entire world approves of. And in mysticism, this comes into play at a deeper level." Having said that, Audrey took the initiative to say, "If you can't really trust me because of my inability to mention this, I'm willing to accept this. I can only remain an ordinary member and use my contributions in exchange for the psychological research materials that are available to me. Lao smiled when he heard that. Everyone has their own secrets. This is very normal. What I need to assess is whether your secret will affect the safety of the entire Psychology Alchemists. He looked deeply at Audrey and said, "Then can you tell me how you got to know such a client?" I remember that I once reported that, before joining the Psychology Alchemists, I'd already come into contact with some people in a mysticism circle and got to know a few Beyonders. Audrey said a truth that couldn't be any truer. As for what the real logical order to the answer was, it was another matter. Furthermore, the matter regarding Vin Rambise's disappearance, which stemmed from the investigation of Furs and Zio, was something both parties had never talked about but had definitely acknowledged. Lao retracted his hands from the table and placed them by his chest. "There's another thing I would like to ask. When was the last time you met Vin Rambis?" Audrey frowned slightly and said, "I remember that I've been asked before." After Vin Rambise's death, she didn't immediately cut off any contact with the Psychology Alchemists. She continued to maintain a certain connection with the upper echelons through Hilbert, Stephen, and Escalante. Only when the war reached Backlund did she realize that she couldn't contact the members of the Psychology Alchemist cell for various reasons. "I need to confirm it in person," Lao said calmly. Audrey nodded gently and said, "The last time I met Vin Rambis was in Viscount Glaint's mansion. At that time, I hypnotized my 2 Beyonder friends I knew, as per his instructions, and asked them why they were investigating Viscount Stratford and who the mastermind behind this was. At that time, Councillor Vin Rambis was nearby, ensuring that nothing went wrong with the hypnotism. After he received the answer, he quickly left. After that day, I never saw him again." As she answered, Audrey was still guarding against the invasion of her mind island. However, it was calm there, and nothing happened. This didn't make Audrey feel relaxed. Instead, she became even more wary. She didn't even dare to think about anything related to Mr. Fool and the World Gehrman Sparrow. She was only certain of one thing. As long as she was exposed to danger, Mr. Fool would definitely provide her with protection. "It's identical to your previous answer." Lao nodded slowly. He then looked into Audrey's green eyes and said frankly, "I can't use mysticism methods to trace the origins of the Beyonder characteristic in your body. This means that the person who provided it has an unimaginable existence behind him." Audrey nodded slightly but forcefully, expressing that she agreed with his assessment. "I can't force you to not cooperate with other Beyonders or make deals. It's unrealistic. I just hope that you can promise not to reveal anything about the Psychology Alchemists to anyone. At the very least, when you wish to entrust certain missions to others, you have to package them and hide the secrets," Lao said calmly as he retracted his gaze. Audrey replied without hesitation, "I promise not to tell any living creature that isn't qualified to know about matters regarding the Psychology Alchemists." She took the initiative to amplify the concept all the way to that of a living being to make up for any loopholes in her promise. As soon as she finished speaking, she felt her thoughts surface from her mind island. These thoughts intertwined, turning into an illusory net that seeped into Audrey's mind island, turning into her subconscious. As this restriction net came from Audrey's spirituality, she would be incapable of removing it even if she became an angel. She would lose the intention of talking about the Psychology Alchemists when she faced non-members of the Psychology Alchemists or people who didn't qualify to know about them. And she wouldn't realize this. "He didn't invade my spiritual island." Just my words alone made the promise turn something substantial. While Audrey was alarmed, her expression didn't show. Of course, she didn't completely restrain herself, as being surprised by such means was an instinctive reaction from a manipulator. Based on this point, she suspected that either there was something wrong with this city that existed in the heart, or that Lao, the Psychology Alchemists president, wasn't just at the level of a saint. Seeing Audrey make her promise, Lao pointed at the long table in satisfaction and said, "From now on, you are a counselor of the Psychology Alchemists. You can choose a persona mask as your code name." As he spoke, 7 grayish-white masks appeared on the long table. They were rather illusory and abnormally cold. 5 of them were placed in front of the corresponding seats, as though they already had a master. The remaining 2 persona masks are Wrath and Pride, Lao introduced. They come from the Holy Bible of the Creator from the 3rd epoch. Audrey thought for a second before reaching out her hand to the mask that didn't contain any anger. "I choose Pride." Lao looked at her and chuckled. That was the choice Vin Rambus made back then. Chapter 13 18:7 Counselors. Audrey's right hand paused for a moment before returning to normal. She picked up the mask known as Pride. A 50% chance isn't low, she replied to Polly Derlau simply. This was to say that picking the mask that Vin Rambus had worn before wasn't a surprising coincidence. With that said, Audrey wore the cold gray mask on her face. Almost instantly, she felt that she had an additional virtual persona that had appeared in her mind island. This didn't stem from the outside world, but rather, a magnification of what she knew to the extremes. They received very little education. They have to make the right choice under my guidance. Not everyone has enough intelligence. On the contrary, most people are very stupid. Those workers are impulsive and irrational. They are easily enticed by tiny perks and have no foresight. Only with me thinking for them, guiding them, and making decisions for them can they be saved. They are worthy of pity, but they aren't worth communicating with. These thoughts echoed in Audrey's mind, almost making her believe that this was the truth. After all, this was partial feedback she had received from her previous observation and experience. It wasn't something that had been fabricated out of thin air. With a sweep of her gaze, Audrey saw herself from the smooth surface of the long table. On the cold gray mask, her eyes moved upwards, fixing it to her forehead as though she could only see things high above without a care about anything else. It was funny, strange, and secretly horrifying. Audrey fell silent. A few seconds later she said in a deep voice, "Is this pride?" If it wasn't for the fact that she had long escaped her misconceptions through the exchange between Mr. World, Mr. Hanged Man, and Ma'am Hermit, she might have been truly affected by Pride's persona. As for what would happen after being affected, she couldn't tell. "You recovered much faster than I expected. It looks like you haven't lost yourself in the experience of manipulating others," Derlau said approvingly. Audrey replied thoughtfully, "Mr. Vin Rambus has always appeared a little proud." Derlau clasped his hands at his chest and said, "You could tell." "Only occasionally. Some details," Audrey replied in 2 short sentences. Derlau sighed and shook his head with a smile. "This mask's influence on Vin Rambus was worse than I expected. Besides, he usually put on a very good disguise. Under this premise, I don't find it strange that he has gone missing. His arrogance will make it impossible for him to see the path beneath his feet. It will make him look down on beyonders who are weaker than him, and this will often bring great danger." Audrey resisted the urge to recall Vin Rambus's death, and asked in deliberation, "These 7 personalities can amplify the corresponding knowledge and emotions to help us realize our own problems, so that we can deal with them directly. At the same time, they will also bring some negative effects, and unknowingly change its wearer's personality?" Derlau nodded slightly. "In the mind domain, it's very difficult to obtain external help that's pure and without danger. One has to have enough internal strength to avoid the corresponding negative effects. You have walked the right path for you to realize this." Audrey was just about to take the opportunity to discuss some questions about the mind domain when she suddenly saw a mask on the table disappear. She subconsciously turned her head and looked at the entrance of the cathedral. She saw a figure walk in through the door. This figure was wearing a 3-piece formal wear suit, and he had a half-top hat in his hand. He wore the mask that had disappeared earlier on. The mouth on the mask was opened wide until it reached close to the ears. Its mouth remained open, as if it wanted to swallow everything that its eyes could see. "This is one of the counselors of the psychology alchemists, Mr. Gluttony." Derlau did the introductions. Following that, the remaining counselors of the psychology alchemists arrived one after another. They were Mr. Lust, Ma'am Greed, Miss Sloth, and Mr. Envy. As a senior spectator, Audrey was the first to notice the difference in their masks. Greed was similar to a gluttony. His mouth reached his earlobes, but it wasn't open. Furthermore, his eyes were closed. Lust was similar to Pride, but its eyes were different from ordinary people. They had sunk to the middle of their noses, as though they were looking at people from the bottom. Envy's eyes, ears, nose and mouth were slightly slanted, and had a gloomy temperament. Sloth's eyes were tightly shut, and its mouth naturally drooped, giving off the feeling that the wearer was sleeping. Seeing all the counselors present, Derlau smiled and said, "Let's wait for another friend. He will be the 7th counselor. 8th, I forgot to count myself." Just as he said that, a figure entered the cathedral's main door. This figure wore a shirt, vest, a black trench coat, and a half-top hat. At a glance, he was a rather fashionable gentleman. However, after some observations, Audrey realized that there was a huge rabbit under the human clothes. Its eyes were bright red and its fur was snow white. The rabbit walked inside, one step at a time, and stopped at the side of the long table. It happened to be beside Audrey. Unfortunately, you only have one choice. Derlau smiled as he pointed at the wrath mask on the table. The rabbit let out a male human voice. I've always been very gentle. It's a good opportunity for me to experience wrath. As it spoke, it picked up the persona mask and wore it on its face. The mask's eyes were wide and its mouth was wide open, as though an angry roar would shout out at any moment. After Mr. Wrath sat down beside Audrey, Derlau clapped his hands and said, I formally introduce the two counselors who will be joining our council. This is Miss Pride. This is Mr. Wrath. They are both demigods and have deep attainments in the domain of the mind. In addition, Miss Pride will be in charge of the greater backland area of the Lone Kingdom. Upon saying that, Derlau looked at Audrey and said, You might not be aware, but we are rooted in the masses of psychologists, psychiatrists, and the corresponding aficionados. Our strength is mainly concentrated in large cities and not small cities and villages. Therefore, every counselor is responsible for a city and the surrounding area. Then Derlau continued, Mr. Wrath is in charge of the Lemberg capital Azhara, Mr. Lust is in charge of the Intis capital Trier, Ma'am Greed is in charge of the Faysac capital, St. Milam. Miss Sloth is in charge of the Fainapotter capital, Fainapotter city. Mr. Envy is in charge of the Intis Republic's Tilisai city. Mr. Gluttony is in charge of the Lone Kingdom's Constant city. After the introduction, Derlau added, Our psychology alchemist's mission is exploration, discovery, and research. We do not care about affecting the scope, member numbers, resources, etc. Therefore we do not have any counselors in the Fog Sea, the Berserk Sea, the Sonia Sea, and the Southern Continent. Of course, there will often be members who go out to the sea to explore the ruins of the Southern Continent in search of ancient history. Haha, I forgot that I'm the king of the Black Throne on the 5 seas. St. Milam, Constant, Tilisai. Nearly half of the counselors of the psychology alchemists are in the mid-Seashire region. Audrey acutely sensed a problem. She came from a noble family, and had received good education since she was young. She was no stranger to the geographical location of every city in the northern continent. She knew that Faysac St. Milam, Lones Constant, and Intis's Tilisai were big coastal cities of mid-Seashire. Although they couldn't compare to the 3 major cities of Backland, Trier, and Fainapotter city, each of them was quite large. Furthermore, there were many medium-sized cities around them. This made the mid-Seashire coast become the most vibrant economic zone in the northern continent, an area with the biggest population. Under such circumstances, it wasn't too surprising that the focus of the psychology alchemists was placed on mid-Seashire. Audrey generally didn't think that the psychology alchemists weren't too interested in expansion. After the counselors got to know each other, Derlau turned his head and said to Audrey, Miss Pride, due to the war, Backland psychology alchemists suffered great losses. We have lost contact with many of the members. I will give you a specific list in the future. You will be in charge of confirming the whereabouts of the members and then organize them again. In this process, I suggest that you don't use your real image and name to finish the tasks. Create a virtual identity to complete them. Vin Rambus didn't do well in this aspect. I think he's a little too proud. Audrey nodded slightly and agreed. Derlau retracted his gaze and said, The second thing to discuss today is the whereabouts of the Mind Dragon in East Chester County of the Lone Kingdom. The dragon-worshipping customs of the Heartlark village haven't been weakened in the past 2 years. I suspect that the Mind Dragon is still influencing it in some way. Perhaps we can use it to find its whereabouts. Who is willing to handle this matter? After raising the question, he recalled that the newly joined Miss Pride and Mr. Wrath didn't have enough knowledge of the corresponding situation. He simply explained the explorations the psychology alchemists had previously done, as well as the problems that his entire archaeological team members encountered. Audrey had actually participated in some matters in the early stages. Now that she had a suitable reason to intervene, she couldn't help but feel her heart palpitate. It wasn't that she really wanted to hunt the Mind Dragon, but rather, she wanted to communicate with it and grasp more knowledge and secrets of the mind domain. However, She wasn't in a hurry to raise her hand. As a counselor participating in the council for the first time, she would rather miss an opportunity than be eager to showcase herself. This is Loan's matter. It's not suitable for us to interfere. Mr. Lust surveyed the area and said, unless Miss Pride and Mr. Gluttony don't have the time for it. Audrey waited for a few more seconds. Seeing that the Gluttony didn't say anything, she looked at Derlau and said, I will try to investigate, but I need more detailed information. Chapter 13:19 Life-Preserving Incantation. Seeing that Audrey was willing to attempt the investigation mission, Derlau nodded and said, I'll give you the detailed information later, but I have to warn you that this matter is rather dangerous. You must not be careless. Upon saying that, Derlau paused for a moment and said, if you encounter an accident, and you can't solve it by relying on yourself, you can try to say a name. This will bring you salvation. What name? Audrey asked as she had a guess in mind. Derlau's expression immediately turned solemn. It comes from the Holy Bible of the Third Epoch's creator. It involves the highest mystery of the mind domain, and it has a close relationship with something of the psychology alchemists. It's Adam. Adam. Audrey didn't find it surprising at all, but she showed her puzzlement on the surface, as though she didn't know what this name meant. Derlau didn't explain and instead said, as a counselor, you should be in charge of a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, you and Wrath have just joined the ranks, so there must be an observation period first. Besides, the former committee member of the Backland region, Vin Rambus, has lost a rather important sealed artifact. We are considering whether we should change the usage method of sealed artifacts and allow usage only via an application. In other words, all the sealed artifacts will be kept in this mined city. You usually won't hold on to them, and can only use them temporarily after an application for particular incidents. The woman in charge of Faceax Capital St. Millum immediately shook her head. There is a very serious flaw in this method. That is that we are unable to deal with any sudden accidents. Be it enemies or monsters, once we encounter them, we will not have the time to apply and retrieve the sealed artifact. I believe that the current method is good enough. Everyone wields a Grade 1 sealed artifact to deal with accidents. When there's a need, we can apply for other items. Derlau laughed and said, this was indeed better in the past. But now, you don't have to worry. As long as you have the chance to resist an accident, then you can directly enter this mined city to avoid the enemy and obtain the item. If there's no chance, just as I said, reciting the name Adam will do. You said Adam twice. That entity is probably already watching. No. He might have been watching from the very beginning. Audrey's heart almost beat faster when she heard that. Then how do we enter without your invitation? Mr. Envy asked as he nodded. Derlau pointed at his face and said, from this council meeting forth, you can take your persona mask out of the city. No matter where you are, as long as there are at least 2 humans around you, yes, other than you will be able to wear the corresponding persona mask and enter the city. And these 7 masks are illusory. They are closely connected to what you know, and there's no need to store them in a special way. With just a thought, you will be able to take them out of the sea of collective subconscious. At that moment the man who was wearing the gluttony mask and exuded a feeling that he was lost in indulgence, thought for a while and said, will bringing the persona mask out of this city affect our mental state and true personality? There will be some effects that need attention. But I believe that you are all experts in the mind domain. You have the ability to resolve problems in this aspect, Derlau said frankly. Audrey was a little worried that these 7 persona masks had something to do with Adam, but she didn't dare think about it in the mind city. She forced herself to rein in her thoughts and replied to what Derlau had said before. I can accept the 2 safekeeping methods of the Grade 1 sealed artifact. I'll patiently wait for the probationary period to end. Miss, you aren't proud, Miss Sloth, who looked like she was sleeping, commented with a smile. After discussing the Mind Dragon in Eastchester County, the other 5 counselors began introducing things that were worth paying attention to in their respective areas as an exchange of information. During this process, Mr. Gluttony, who seemed to be capable of eating an entire cow at any moment and wore 10 rings, said, the Constant region hasn't been peaceful recently. There have been many miracles happening one after another. First, Constant City was rebuilt overnight. Second, Belton City's citizens collectively lost their memories of a certain period of time. Third, a powerful archmage who grants the wishes of others for pleasure has been wandering the eastern shore of the mid-seashore. He's called Merlin Hermes. Related to this, there's an item known as the fully automatic wishing machine. Other than that, I also noticed something strange. Many rats, cockroaches, and crows in Constant City have lost their souls, days after the city was miraculously restored. Why were you able to sense this problem? Mr. Lust looked up at Gluttony from the bottom. Gluttony gulped and said, I've been researching the mind problems of ordinary creatures recently. Rats, cockroaches, and crows are my experimental subjects. The counselors immediately started discussing the direction of this research before the meeting officially entered the third stage. Their academic exchange enriched Audrey's knowledge quite a bit. She listened very seriously and would occasionally share her thoughts and insights. All right, this conference will end here. After a while, Lau clapped his hands. Audrey subconsciously wanted to stand up and lead the other counselors into bowing and bidding farewell. However, she quickly came to her senses and continued sitting there, being the penultimate person to stand up. Before leaving, she asked curiously, Mr. President, does this city have a name? Yes. Lau laughed. The Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Audrey saw that the other counselors were walking towards the door and asked thoughtfully, There are many cathedrals here. They should represent a faith. I wonder which existence the residents here believe in. Lau nodded and replied solemnly, The omnipotent and omniscient Creator. Garden of Eden. The omnipotent and omniscient Creator. If this wasn't created by Adam, I'll write my name backward. Above the gray fog, inside the ancient palace, Klein looked at the crimson star representing Miss Justice and silently muttered to himself. In addition, to recite, Adam, when faced with danger as a response would indicate a problem without concealing anything. Ever since Miss Justice entered the Garden of Eden, the true vision provided by Sapphira Castle had been suppressed. Klein could only use Audrey's point of view to observe the surroundings, just like how Queen Mystic Bernadette's fixed viewpoint back on the primitive island. To a certain extent, this also showed the status of the Mind City, Garden of Eden. Klein gently tapped the edge of the long mottled table and conjured a pen and paper to write his thoughts. This wasn't something he couldn't analyze based on his own thinking. Instead, when facing an existence like Adam, he needed to repeatedly ponder and analyze the details. Thus, the words that formed on the paper helped him to read them back and forth so as to notice and make up any missing details. Basic premise. Adam has already advanced to sequence 0 using the full-scale war from before. By becoming a true god, he can be known as a visionary. Miss Justice happened to become a sequence 4 manipulator after Vin Rambise's death. She may be able to convince others, but she can't convince Adam. What does Adam want? Setting up a sequence 4 saint doesn't match his identity as a visionary unless he has another ploy up his sleeves. His real target is the Mind Dragon, or is it me who's backing Miss Justice? Care and vigilance must be enhanced on this matter. We must not be careless. In the Garden of Eden, the cathedral that the psychology alchemists counselors were using is similar to Adam's corpse cathedral. However, it's only a little similar. The stone columns on its exterior are inlaid with several skulls. There is no corresponding layout inside, and the color is dark black and very gloomy. What does this mean? What does that grayish-white dragon coiling around the huge cross symbolize? The first step in resurrecting the Creator has been successful? Adam is already a visionary. If his father or the original Creator returns, he would be the first one to be unlucky. He is willing to sacrifice himself? This is the meaning of being zealous? That rabbit is suspected to be Hermes. However, as an angel of the spectator pathway, it doesn't make sense for him to not be able to remove Miss Messenger's transformation curse after so long, especially since he has a visionary who can provide help. Did Hermes do it on purpose? Yes, the president of the psychology alchemists, Lau, mentioned that to the spectator, death only represented the end of one's identity. He can still participate in other theatrical plays in other aspects as another identity. By combining them together, does this mean that once the spectator pathway reaches sequence 3 or sequence 2, they can separate the identities they once held and make them become living people? And even if these identities were to die, it wouldn't lead to the deaths of their real bodies? It does look like the preamble to becoming a visionary. The rabbit that Hermes turned into after being cursed was separated as an identity which later directly participated in the psychology alchemists? What does he want to do? Back then, when the Twilight Hermit Order communicated, he was sitting beside the Emperor. After Klein was done writing, he put down his fountain pen and carefully read the contents a few times, his heart clouded with mystery and puzzlement. In the end, he could only decide to continue observing and be vigilant. And at this moment, Audrey had already taken the carriage she used, exited the Garden of Eden, and returned to the park in Empress Borough with a man-made lake. She wasn't in a rush to pray to Mr. Fool, hoping that there would be a better way to seal the Pride Mask. She returned to her luxurious villa as though nothing had happened. Chapter 13:20 Mind Male Susie was sitting by the door, waiting for Audrey to return. At that moment, the golden retriever immediately went up to her as soon as she saw her approach. She even gave a rather talented showcase of her acting by barking and wagging her tail. She didn't ask on the spot. Instead, she kept accompanying Audrey back to her bedroom before asking in concern, "Is it over?" Audrey tersely acknowledged, indicating that there was no problem. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Susie pressed. "Not yet." Audrey shook her head slightly. Due to Susie's concern, she instinctively recalled her previous experience, but to her surprise, she realized that she couldn't recall the image and name of the psychology alchemist's president. To recall even the information that she had learned from the world Gehrman Sparrow, she had to focus quite a bit. To be frank, in front of Beyonders below the demigod level, she could do similar feats as a manipulator. However, to influence a saint in the mind domain and make it impossible for them to sense it was almost impossible unless the other party was hypnotized, unconscious or enslaved. That gentleman's level is probably higher than I expected. Audrey controlled her emotions and calmly made a certain judgment. She gave Susie a look and got the golden retriever to stand guard outside the door. In her mind, she outlined the character mask that represented pride. Just as she was thinking about this, she felt a slight fluctuation in the sea of collective subconscious around her. With just a thought, Audrey reached out her left hand and grabbed it. She took out an abnormally cold, illusory grayish-white mask. As long as I seriously think about it, will this pride mask come to my side? Or should I say that it has already existed in my subconscious and has been following me? As Audrey carefully examined her mind island, she signaled with a thought that made the pride mask vanish. The ice-cold illusory grayish-white mask quickly turned transparent and melted into the surrounding sea of collective subconscious. Audrey still couldn't determine where this pride mask had gone. Why did it appear in such a timely manner each time? This made her increasingly wary. She decided to pray to Mr. Fool and make the wish of sealing the mask. Just as she was thinking of doing a few more experiments to obtain more knowledge from pride, she saw the sea of collective subconscious begin to resonate without using her manipulator Beyonder powers. A beam of light came from afar as it grew larger and more obvious. Finally, it turned into an illusory letter. This letter stopped in front of Audrey's mind island as though it was searching for a path to complete the delivery. Audrey naturally wouldn't let any foreign object enter her mind world. She hurriedly reached out her left hand and touched the illusory letter. As the war had just ended and there were many things in the kingdom that needed to be done, the nobles didn't return to their respective fiefs during New Year's. They remained in Backlund all this time. It was already the end of February. Earl Hall nodded and said, "About April. In the ancient palace above the fog. Mind mail. Be careful of viruses, don't click on them without thought." As Klein sighed, he threw the curtain that represented the attendant of mysteries Beyonder characteristic back into the junk pile, allowing it to cover all the items there. He had just fulfilled Miss Justice's wish using the grafting ability he named. He connected the illusory concept of the persona mask to an ordinary metal mask, and he gave the Worms of Spirit, who were on duty at Sapphira Castle, an order to recharge the powers from time to time to prolong the grafting effect. From the description of Mr. Gluttony from the psychology alchemists, Zeridal seems to have found Constant City. I have to be even more careful. Klein tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his finger, causing Worms of Spirit to appear from his body. His figure vanished from Sapphira Castle. Winter County, Amantha Mountain Range, Cathedral of Serenity. Leonard obtained a document from the Pope. This was the first thing he was responsible for after becoming a high-ranking deacon. After returning to his room, Leonard leisurely leaned back and placed his feet on the desk. Then, he opened the document in his hand and began reading. A wandering magician, Merlin Hermes, grants the wishes of others for pleasure. The newly rebuilt Constant City. Fully automatic wishing machine. Sequence 4 of the Seer pathway is Bizarro Sorcerer, Sequence 3 is Scholar of Yore, and Sequence 2 is Miracle Invoker. Leonard read until he suddenly fell silent. After a few seconds, he suppressed his voice and asked, "Old man, how many angels of the Seer pathway are active across the land?" Palaz Zoroast scoffed. "This is acting. There should only be one Miracle Invoker who still needs to act. You should know who I'm talking about." Leonard looked at the information in his hand again and mumbled, "He's having quite a good time." He had already decided that the main purpose of this mission was to act as a night watcher and digest his potion. He could also travel in passing. As for handling the matter, what mattered was to find a reasonable explanation. After flipping through the thick documents in boredom, Leonard retracted his feet and stood up. He was going to retrieve a Grade 1 sealed artifact that a high-ranking deacon like him could own. To other saints of the Church of Evernight, this was quite a headache. This was because the negative effects of sealed artifacts weren't easily endured. It was even more so when one needed to carry them for a long period of time. However, if one chose a holy artifact that was more compatible with him, there would be a problem of powers overlapping. Chapter 1321 The 6 Special Pathways. The Fool Klein slowly surveyed the area. He didn't provide an explanation to everyone as they had expected. Instead, he reined in his sigh and asked with a smile, "Where do you think the 22 Beyonder pathways originate from?" This was one of the 3 most important questions in mysticism, with no consensus for the answer. Every school of thought had its own theory. No one could convince anyone. Katlia deliberated for a moment before replying, "The essence of the world is knowledge, and the essence of knowledge is data. Humans are data, and the Beyonder characteristics of the 22 pathways are data. All things are a form of data, and this is how it was born." She had offered the Moses ascetic orders theory, but that was not her own point of view. The 7 churches believed that the Beyonder characteristic originated from the original creator. He transformed into all things, including the deities, humans, sea, land, and Beyonder characteristics, Leonard briefly explained. Of course, this is an explanation given to deacons and above. The official Beyonders below Sequence 6 don't need to know so much. Then he glanced at Emlyn and said, "The Life School of Thought believes that the world is split into 3 levels. The material world, the world of the spirit, and the world of absolute rationality. Beyonder characteristics are the projections of certain things from the world of absolute rationality into the material world and world of the spirit. Therefore, characteristics can't be destroyed. It only reassembles." From the looks of it, the world of absolute rationality that the Life School of Thought promotes might be referring to the River of Fate. The Fool Klein thought of Willa Septon, but he remained silent and didn't interrupt the conversation between the members of the Tarot Club. Emlyn returned a glance at the star and said, "As one of the rulers of the second epoch, us Sanguine believe that Beyonder characteristics do come from the original creator. Then, the various characteristics accumulated and produced the ancient gods. The ancient gods then created different races." This was the Sanguine's explanation for the first epoch, and Emlyn already had some doubts about it. After all, he had encountered many secrets thanks to the Tarot Club. Alger nodded slightly. Although there are many explanations for the origins of a Beyonder characteristic, most of them point to the original creator. The Orthodox churches, Aurora Order, and the City of Silver share such a belief. In other words, Beyonder characteristics originating from the original creator is quite the prevalent understanding? Audrey asked thoughtfully. The psychology alchemists mainly studied the mind world and the sea of collective subconscious. They lacked complete theories regarding the origins of the Beyonder characteristics. Roughly. Alger didn't conceal his views. At this moment the Fool Klein sighed and said, "Not all of them." He didn't proceed on to give a long story, but gave a rather vague answer. "Not all of them. Mr. Fool means that Beyonder characteristics indeed originate from the original creator, but not all of them. A small number of them are special cases? Is this the reason for the specialness of the Planter and Moon pathway?" Alger instantly thought of a lot and grasped the essence of the problem. As it had nothing to do with her, Furs continued listening leisurely. At this moment she asked curiously, "Honorable Mr. Fool, your meaning seems to be that most Beyonder characteristics originated from the original creator, and the 2 pathways such as Planter and Moon are an exception. Then where did they come from?" The fool Klein said simply, "The cosmos." Cosmos. Emlyn was alarmed when he heard that. He realized that the matter might be more serious than he had imagined. The Tarot Club had already shared the danger of the underground corruption and the cosmos. All of the members knew that these two concepts led to corruption simply from understanding it. When Audrey, Katlia, and company looked at each other, the fool Klein maintained his hint of a sigh and added, "Not just these two." He and the Seven Lights had always maintained their contact and had already confirmed that 6 of the Beyonders of the 22 Beyonder pathways belonged to outer deities. "Honorable Mr. Fool, what other pathways come from the cosmos?" Audrey habitually raised her hand and asked curiously and warily. The fool Klein replied succinctly, "Prisoner, criminal, lawyer, and arbiter." The first two came from the mother tree of desire, and the latter two, along with the nation of disorder, came from the son of chaos. Chaos gave birth to order, and order came with its own shadow. Arbiter. Furs turned her head in surprise and glanced at Zio. She had just thought that this matter had nothing to do with her. She could only watch and not worry about it. Who knew that the trouble was right at her doorstep? Zio frowned slightly and looked at the end of the long bronze table. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I usually don't sense any abnormalities, nor have I received any divine epiphanies. Other than those from you." The fool Klein smiled and said, "The arbiter and lawyer are relatively better." According to his understanding, the influence the son of chaos had on both the arbiter and the lawyer pathway wasn't deep. It was incomparable to the mother goddess of depravity's influence on the moon and planter pathways, and the mother tree of desire's influence on the criminal and prisoner pathways. This outer deity had gone silent, as though he had disappeared. Furs and Zio secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, they became more wary of the future. With Mr. Fool not explaining further, Emlyn composed himself and said, "The uniqueness of the planter and moon pathway comes from the cosmos. The divine epiphanies I sensed are likely a form of corruption?" Alger looked at Mr. Fool at the end of the long mottled table. Seeing that he had no intention of speaking, he nodded and said, "Probably so." "This is a test for me." Emlyn sighed and said, "I've already grasped the names of the high-sequence potions of the planter and moon pathway. I'm somewhat puzzled about 2 of them." After becoming a sanguine earl and a high-ranking deacon of the Church of Earth, he obtained the corresponding clearance to access plenty of information that he had never been able to. Seeing the other members of the Tarot Club look over, the World Gehrman Sparrow raised his hand to pinch his chin. Emlyn thought and said, "The moon pathway is as follows. Sequence 3, High Summoner. Sequence 2, Life Giver. Sequence 1, Beauty Goddess. The planter pathway is as follows. Sequence 3, Pallbearer. Sequence 2, Desolate Matriarch. Sequence 1, Nature Walker. What I don't understand is that the names of the 2 potions, Beauty Goddess and Desolate Matriarch, have certain gender inclinations. What are your thoughts on this?" For a moment, no one from the Tarot Club spoke. They looked at each other and thought of a possibility. A few seconds later, Audrey controlled her gaze and said in deliberation, "I remember that sequence 7 of the assassin pathway is called Witch. Assassins who consume this potion become witches. This is a test for me." Emlyn's lips moved slightly, unable to say a word. When he learned the name of the potions, he already had a certain premonition, but he wasn't willing to accept it. He hoped that he could obtain another explanation from the Tarot Club. "Don't worry. You have a low chance of becoming an angel. Even if you can, you won't have the chance to be a beauty goddess." Klein mumbled inwardly, but he didn't say any words of comfort. Everyone fell silent. Leonard coughed and took the initiative to say, "I'll share some matters." He spoke at a moderate pace regarding Merlin Hermes, the rebuilding of Constant City overnight, and the fully automatic wishing machine. As he spoke, he shot a glance at the World Klein. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he made the World Gehrman Sparrow look ahead. "I'll be leaving the eastern coast of Mid-Seashire soon." These were all done by Mr. World? Can he already create such miracles? As expected of an angel, a him. Audrey recalled the information the psychology alchemist's counselor, Mr. Gluttony, had shared. She was both surprised and impressed. She didn't use her spectator's powers to conceal her reaction. This was because everyone had expressed the same emotions, except for Mr. Starr, who clearly knew about it. Merlin Hermes. Wandering magician. Furs noted the name deep down and secretly decided to distance herself from this name whenever she heard it in the future. This didn't mean that she was still afraid of Gehrman Sparrow, but she knew something. It definitely wasn't safe around Gehrman Sparrow. Something would always be happening in some way or another. Of course, an instinctive sense of fear was inevitable. It was just like how a seed of fear sown when one was young would remain even when one became an adult. Granting wishes for pleasure. Fully automatic wishing machine. Is this the world Gehrman Sparrow's acting? Alger and Katlia had similar thoughts simultaneously flashing through their minds. Then they thought of something. Ever since some time ago, Mr. Fool had made everyone pray to him, in the form of a wish before granting them. He is helping the world digest the potion, or is it that he and the world are from the same pathway? After he awoke, he also exhibits similar characteristics? Little Sun said before that Mr. Fool's actions were a miracle, allowing the city's residents to directly move from the forsaken land of the gods to outside Biome City. With the fact that the world Gehrman Sparrow is still acting, this shouldn't be something he can do. Alger nodded indiscernibly as he made a guess about the pathway Mr. Fool was in. About to leave the eastern coast of Mid-Seashire? Then my investigation will be even easier. I can just come up with a simple conclusion. At most, I can just directly report that Gehrman Sparrow has become a miracle invoker and is acting. Anyway, the people who should know are already aware. Leonard mumbled silently and didn't ask further. At this moment, the world Gehrman Sparrow looked around and asked, "What do you know about the King of the Black Throne, Barrows Hopkins?" You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.